Hello, and welcome to the Ada Kappa Nu podcast, Career Conversations. I'm your host, Amy Jones, and I'm a member of the HKN Young Alumni Team, a group of engineers and computer scientists navigating our own careers and sharing our conversations about work, life, family, and having it all. Today, we're covering a topic that is very near and dear to my heart: imposter syndrome. More than just a buzzword, imposter syndrome is a phenomenon that impacts many, with particular emphasis on minorities in engineering. Today, our guest is Dr. Melissa Sassy. As IBM Z's chief penguin, Dr. Melissa Sassy created her own IBM job title and is the founder and global head of IBM HyperProtect Accelerator, where she focuses on empowering early stage startups to build, scale, and thrive. Prior to IBM, Dr. Sassy was an impact investor at Microsoft, focusing on building and scaling internet and energy access solutions and bringing digital skills to the newly connected. As founder and CEO of Mentor Nations, Dr. Sassy created a youth led digital skills movement teaching tens of thousands of young changemakers to code in 12 countries. Dr. Sassy is also CEO and co founder of her latest startup venture, Skills Hustle, a digital skills entrepreneurship and professional development platform that aims to solve the skills gap around the world. Her Skills Hustle platform launches in 2022. Dr. Sassy is an avid speaker on startup innovation, digital skills and inclusion, tech entrepreneurship, tech for good, community building, youth empowerment, imposter syndrome, gender inclusion, and personal branding. You can find Dr. Sassy on Twitter at Mentor Africa, MENTORAFRIKA. And I'm so excited to talk to her today about imposter syndrome. So thank you so much for being here today, Melissa.
Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of IEEE HKN.
Well, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about what is imposter syndrome?
Oh gosh. I think first off, before I get into imposter syndrome and what the heck it is, I want to say that before you listen to this and you hear about what imposter syndrome is exactly, I want everyone to know that it's not just something that impacts women and girls. I hear a lot of people when they think they know what imposter syndrome is, they're like, oh, this is something that's only faced by women. And I think all of us display it. And again, I'll define what it is in a second in different ways. So don't be deceived. We all have our own little nuances in the way that we, I don't know, project ourselves or our vulnerabilities, our insecurities, which are often perceived versus actual. But I think it's that feeling that everyone in the room is smarter than you, which is usually not the case, by the way. And even if they are, so what? That there was this huge mistake that you got to wherever you are by dumb luck, or you just knew the right people, or it was just an accident. And I'm sure that a lot of this goes through all of our minds sometimes, especially for those of us working in tech. But again, we can't think to extremes like it only happens to people in tech or it only happens to women or girls. It's something where often we might even downplay our knowledge, we might downplay our skills, we might downplay our abilities when someone gives us a compliment, for example. It's that feeling like, wait a second, am I a fraud? Again, did I get here by accident? No, you didn't get there by accident. We all have, again, our unique strengths and the things that we bring to the table. It often kind of brings about, and I think that imposter syndrome is very closely connected to perfectionism. And it's kind of this feeling like, wow, I got to be perfect. I got to have all these strengths. I got to be as technical as that person, or as business savvy as that person, or my personal brand needs to be that, or wow, look what that other person is doing. I've got this checklist that I got from a friend of mine, and I'll review it with y'all today. But for me, that's what imposter syndrome means. And by the way, it impacts 70% of people out there in some way, shape, or form. And everyone kind of has their different, let's say, extent to which it impacts them, their lives, or their feelings about their work.
That's really interesting. I think one of the key things that defines imposter syndrome to me is that it's something that we all feel is very personal to us. Everybody else is so confident, and we're
Oh,
obviously the only ones struggling.
right.
But when you talk about it, it sounds much more like a universal experience.
I think it really is. I think it just, again, manifests itself in different ways. We all have different ways that we either mask or let our vulnerabilities shine. And I think the more that you are open about your vulnerabilities, your weaknesses, the things that stress you out, the things that might make your mental health trigger go haywire, are the things that actually make people, feel more included. And why I say that is it makes us human. It makes us recognize that, hey, wait a second, I can be not okay today.
That sounds like the kind of thing, like, it's almost like we wanna protect ourselves from the perception of the people around us. Nobody wants to be a failure, but the things that when we fail, we actually end up creating an environment where others can be honest about who they are as well.
I agree with that. And I learned about imposter syndrome from my friend Donna Sakar, who works at Microsoft. She's an amazing engineer. She's an amazing developer, but she's not just an engineer and a developer or a Microsoftie. She has her own fashion line, and she's always been really passionate about fashion. Decided that she was going to go and start up her own company, focuses a lot on sustainability. She was profitable in like the first year or something crazy like
Oh,
that.
wow, that never happens.
Oh, yeah. She is the director or chief technology officer of the accessibility team at Microsoft. So she does a lot to empower people with disabilities. She talks about her own disability. And she wrote a book on imposter syndrome that was all about banishing that imposter syndrome inside of you. And that's what inspired me to really research it. It's what made me realize that, wait a second, that's me. It's the thought that trying to dispel that concept that you're succeeding by accident, or that you don't belong, or that you aren't the reason you really achieved that thing, when in reality, yes, you did that thing, and yes, you deserved, to achieve whatever you achieved, and yes, you do belong, and you do deserve that seat at the table.
So, one of the things that I find really interesting is when I hear about people like you and your colleague who are obviously very successful in multiple areas. It's really easy to look at you and say, like, well, obviously it's imposter syndrome for them. They're so successful. How could they possibly even think for a second that they're not? For those of us who are a little bit newer in our careers, who maybe don't have the same track record of achievement, how do we know that we have imposter syndrome?
Well, I think it's always natural that you're going to compare and compete. It's kind of part of human nature, right? But I think there's healthy comparison and healthy competition. And who cares what label you put on it, whether it's imposter syndrome or just, hey, I'm having a bad day where I feel like I don't belong or I'm just off. Doesn't really matter what label we put on it. I think it's more about when you do have a feeling like that, what do you say to yourself and what do you do? And in my mind, I think the first thing is to recognize that, hey, wait a second, I have this bully inside of my head or on my shoulder telling me this, that, and the other. Maybe I don't suffer from imposter syndrome, but boy, girl, people, I feel like an imposter right now. And I think it's important to recognize and say to yourself that, wait a second, perfectionism isn't healthy. It's not healthy for you or others around you. And ultimately, you are as good as the people around you, even if that person who's around, those people who are around you, or that person who's sitting across the table from you might have X number of years more experience, or maybe that person might be a distinguished engineer or a CEO or just someone you look up to, maybe even a celebrity. At the end of the day, we're all just normal people, and everyone, no matter how famous, infamous, or lack thereof you are, that feeling is really normal. There are a lot of celebrities who feel this way. There are a lot of young people who feel this way. And so I think whether you're a superstar in your field or an up and coming whatever, superstar or lack thereof, we all have different strengths that we bring to the table. I have a 16, well, she's 17 now. I have a 17-year-old mentor. Originally, she thought that I was her mentor, right? Because that's how you would normally think of it.
Completely understandable
Right?
assumption.
Yeah. And her journey, I'm like, Lella, I don't know if this or not, but do you think you are also my mentor? She's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, do that you make me think about things that I wouldn't normally think about or see the world in a different way. And she was like, well, how so? And it's just an amazing young woman she won the Princess Diana Award last year. I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to nominate her. So I was like flipping out, like, oh my gosh, you did it. It's definitely not about my nomination, it's all what she did. But I think we all have to recognize that we all have something to bring to the table, whether you're young, not so young, experienced, not so experienced. And it's very normal to look around us and think, wow, I'm not that. But it's also important for us to not compare our chapter 5 with somebody else's chapter 25.
Oh, that's such a fascinating thing. I think especially for a lot of type A people, it's really easy for us to look at other people's highlight reel and start comparing our day to day to that.
Oh, absolutely. Like when I first came to IBM, I thought I was a total loser. I thought I was like so dumb. I was convinced I was getting fired because I work in tech, but I'm not an engineer, right?
Hmm?
I can hold to my own in a technical conversation, but if you get too deep, you lost me because I'm not an engineer. I'm not rolling up my sleeves, building applications. I couldn't code my way out of a cardboard box. If the zombie apocalypse is upon us and it is on me to like save the world through my technical acumen, like we're all going down in flames. So don't put me in charge. However, my GM, my general manager from IBM, he's very senior. He's one of my mentors. He's got thousands of people underneath him. I actually have his picture up next to me, which is what made me think of it. And no, I'm not like doing weird things. I have a reason it's up there. So Ross, if you're listening, it's not weird, I promise. But one of the things he said to me is, you're not an imposter. And if I ever hear you feeling like you're an imposter, you come to me and tell me because I will remind you that you're not. And I don't care if you're technical or non-technical. You've got these special things that you bring to the table. And in my mind, they're this, this, and this. However, you're going to be around people who have this, that, and the other as their superpower. And the strength is really in putting all of these superpowers together to build a more diverse, equitable, inclusive, innovative, creative team because we're never going to be perfect. And you need to stop striving for perfection because you're never going to be perfect. None of us are.
That's so encouraging to hear. One of the things that I think I've heard you touch on a couple of times, I'd like to dig a little deeper,
Yeah.
and that's about the impact of community on kind of bolstering yourself against imposter syndrome. One of the things that I would love to hear more about is your work with Mentor Nations. If you're working with youth to kind of build up their digital skills, I'm guessing that a lot of those students may not have had an opportunity to build
Yeah.
their digital skills before. So it's brand new to them. So, how do
Yeah.
you talk to them about imposter syndrome and feeling that they fit in?
So I think the first thing is whether it's my work in Tunisia, which just as background to kind of shed some light on my work within the realm of Mentor Nations. I'm the CEO and founder, as you mentioned. When I started it, and by the way, I don't take a salary for it. It's my like give forward kind of thing. It's my test
Passion
and learn.
project.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about it is it started out with a vacation where we decided, and there were some other things that led up to making this decision, such as sending 400 laptops to 20 schools across Tunisia, which came from Microsoft and HP. But what happened after that was kind of thinking about how do we bring meaningful access to the internet to people who might not have been exposed to computer science? Because in my mind, digital literacy and computer science is a component of that, not the only component, but a component, was how do we make sure that our future has access to digital skills because we know that significant gaps exist when it comes to digital skills. Significant gaps exist in the educational system. We have challenges in terms of getting qualified teachers who know about computer science. Lots of ed tech innovations happening, but it doesn't necessarily mean, despite all of the ed tech innovations, that things happen on the ground in rural communities or even in inner cities. So me and my friends decided that we were going to take this trip around Tunisia to teach kids to code. I was with a bunch of engineering students, and it was one of the moments in my life where I knew like this is what I was meant to do, right? I looked around with like all these kids, my gang from Mentor Nations, and as we were inspiring these kids through computer science, so we went to like countless cities. I don't even like we traveled for a few weeks and we went to all these cities. We were on the Algerian border. We were on the Libyan border. We were in the Sahara. We were deep in the Sahara, and we were also in other major cities across the country. And sometimes the National Guard would come. Sometimes the mayor would come. Don't worry, we didn't end up in jail. Not yet, anyway. No, I'm kidding. Sometimes, there'd be banners in the town, and we realized that we were out there doing the thing, making a difference, and that people really needed and wanted what we had to offer. And then we had, there was a gap. There was a educational gap. There was a access gap. And at the end of the day, if you don't have access skills and utilization of technology, you're going to be left behind. And so we thought, like, how do we not only empower them with these skills, but make sure that they know that, hey, you belong, these skills are right in front of you, and here's how you can access them. Did we go out and throughout this few week trip and turn a bunch of 10-year-olds into engineers? No, we didn't. But what we did is we inspired them to recognize that it doesn't matter where you come from, whether you're from a small village in the Sahara or you're from New York City, this material, this learning content, this profession, this life-changing opportunity is there for you. And here are the kinds of things that you can build, you can do, you can create if you study this kind of stuff. And by the way, here's some places where you can go and play around with things as you're kind of just starting out your journey. Many of my students, if you will, they've come on and off and went to university to study computers. Those that were in their teens, for example, and became older. Others went off to win competitions and hackathons, and some are studying abroad and really changing the world in meaningful ways. My CTO from my nonprofit is now my co-founder and CTO for Skills Hustle, where now he's here in the US. We're collaborating on this new platform. And I don't know, I think by surrounding yourself with community, you are, and also especially youth, you're creating all these strengths and skills and things that, I don't know, maybe you didn't even know were a superpower before. At least that's what happened to me. I found that volunteerism was my pathway to finding out, hey, Melissa, here's what you're good at. I'm not so sure I identified that working in like the private sector or working in like my actual job. Don't get me wrong, I work for a great company. I've worked for great companies, but it's just a different feeling. And volunteerism, I think, brought me that. And I think it also brought our students a sense of belonging, or at least I hope so. That's what they say anyway.
That is so inspirational. I love the concept of broadening some of the areas of your impact and really giving yourself kind of multiple homes to really be able to share what you're passionate about. I
Yeah,
am
I think you've got to ultimately find your passion. You've got to find your secret sauce. You've got to find your strengths. We don't all know what they are. Like it took me years. I'm 46, which I don't know how I got to be this way. And for most people who know me, they think I'm going to stay young forever in terms of like my attitude and my passion and all that kind of stuff. We'll see. Hopefully, I think I'm going to be like that old lady with like big black round glasses and like lipstick on my teeth and like a lot of rings and crazy. But I think that there's just I don't know, so much to talk about in this space.
So, for those of us who don't have an opportunity to travel to Tunisia or to start a nonprofit, how do we go about identifying some of the things that are our superpowers and our secret sauces?
Yeah, so for me, how I found mine, and I didn't find it for until like a few years ago.
Hmm.
Like I had no idea what I was good at. And I think I always felt like an imposter. I can remember even as a young girl, kind of feeling like I don't belong. I'm either not rich enough, or I'm not pretty enough, or I'm not this enough, or I'm not smart enough. I know this is so weird to say, and I even feel weird saying it, but I got this job on Wall Street years ago. All right. And it was like the dream job. Like, oh my gosh, you're gonna go work on Wall Street. And I went to work at Goldman Sachs. I later went on to work at BlackRock. And right now I think BlackRock might manage like 9 trillion of the world's assets. And I had a VP role, I had a director role, and I didn't know until I got that job at Goldman Sachs where it took that is what took me to realize, like, wait a second, I think I'm smart. And part of it was someone I look up to who I believe is one of the smartest people I've ever met. This guy can like do math in his head and all this crazy stuff. He told me, Melissa, you're one of the smartest people I know. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, stop lying. You're just trying to like flirt with me or something. And
Hmm.
by the way, well done. Well done. You just like made my head explode. And I like you even more now. Thank you for, boosting my confidence. And he's like, no, 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 I'm dead serious. Like your memory, the way you go after things, the way you think about things, the way you tie things together, your innovation, your creativity. And what I realized is that, wait a second, these are some of my superpowers. These are some of my strengths. And I think for me, it was kind of like in the back of my head, but I didn't realize it. So I, carried on doing my jobs, doing my things. And then I started volunteering. Like before, I may give money here and there. I may have went to like a gala or wore a fancy dress or something like that. But I never had this volunteer endeavor that I felt like deeply connected to. Like I heard about people who got deeply connected to volunteerism, and I always tell them as like, oh, these do good people who I'm not there. Like maybe I don't care enough about this or that or whatever. And then I stumbled upon this whole digital inclusion thing. I stumbled upon the concept of community engagement and solving a big, wicked challenge. And as I was out in the field, as I was abroad, I realized, like, wait a second, this is what I'm good at. And mine may have happened in another country, and I'm fortunate to have had that opportunity. However, that doesn't mean that you need to be in another country, in a faraway land, to learn what your strengths are, what your superpowers are, or even volunteer. For example, when I started volunteering for the IEEE way back when, I was doing it mostly virtually. It was all happening for the most part virtually. And so we were convening through different means. Things happened a little bit differently 5 years ago. Not to say that 5 years ago is that long. However, most of the convening and the collaboration happened virtually. And when I first started volunteering, I didn't know that much of anything about digital inclusion. I wasn't an engineer. I was totally an imposter, or at least I thought. But what I knew how to do was be a program manager, get stuff done, be a project manager. So I applied those skills in that particular setting, kept showing up until I was able to kind of siphon off a lot of the subject matter expertise to where all of a sudden I could talk about those topics like everyone else in the group because I'd heard it so much. I practiced what I'd heard, and I developed a lot of the, writing material, presentation material until I could talk about it confidently and realize that, wait a second, I know this stuff as well as Mei Lin or whatever. I might not be Vint Cerf, the father of the internet, but wow, I just sat on a panel and Vint Cerf was the moderator. Vint was asking me questions. So I think that it comes with hard work, dedication, and finding your groove.
I I love that. When you talk about like, oh, taking a while to realize you're smart. I mean, part of me was like, well, I've talked to you for 10 minutes and I can tell that you're one of the smartest people I know. How could it take that long?
I know
But
it
then I
took me
realized
like 30 years, 30
it
flipping years.
it's such a common experience too. I think all of us probably have people who will share a vulnerability or their own self-doubts and we'll look at them and like, I had no idea you're so incredible.
Right? Like I will tell you, I think it came from a lot of different scenarios. Like I remember an interaction that I had with like, I think she was my fifth grade teacher, something like that. I went to space camp and it was like a school trip. Yes, I got to go to space camp. And no, I wasn't rich. You might think, oh my gosh, she went abroad. She went to space camp. She's so rich. I wasn't. It was something my school sponsored. I went on a school bus. It wasn't like what you think. At least my circumstance wasn't. And I had to share a room with like one other person and a teacher. Because my parents didn't go, and she was like the chaperone. And she was the mean teacher. And again, I can't remember which year it was, but I can't remember. I was like homesick or I missed like a boy or I don't know what it was, but I cried. And she like berated me, told me to stop crying. And with that kind of attitude, I'm never gonna be anything. And it was really bad. Like I'll never forget like this, you're never gonna be anything, right?
Mhm.
And fast forward to high school, right? I had we all make dumb mistakes in high school, right?
Mhm.
For some stupid reason, I stole something from a classmate.
Mhm.
I shouldn't have done it. It was bad. I stole something from a classmate and I got caught. My parents were involved. My parents are the ones who turned me in, I think. Either way, it was bad. And I got in trouble at school, like everybody at school know. It was embarrassing. Not only again, should I not have done it, but your peer group and everyone around you was like, oh, she's a thief. You know what I mean? Totally embarrassing. And I had to go in with the high school counselor. And he told me, I won't say all the colorful words he used because he did use colorful words. He's like, do you know that you're never going to amount to anything based on your track record? And you're never going to be anything. I don't think you'll end up succeeding in college. And I don't know if he was playing like what you call it, tough love or what it was. But again, those were the words I remember. I can't remember anything else of the conversation. I remember that, right? In college, I had another interaction that reinforced that same thing. You're never going to be anything. And I look back now at the high school counselor, that Spanish teacher in college, Mrs. Whatever from elementary school. And I'm like, okay, you may have stuck with me for a long period of time and told me I didn't belong. I wasn't this enough. I wasn't that enough. But you know what? You're actually totally wrong. And you are the ones who may not have actually ever amounted to anything. And maybe there was something about me that made me different than others. That's kind of how I look at it now is I've got ADHD and I just realized it not too long ago. And I look back and I think, what if I would have known that that's why I was different than others? Was that really what was going on? Or was it just a bunch of haters? Either way, thankfully, for the most part, that voice in the back of my head, I know the narrative to give that voice now because I know it's going to impact my salary if I think like this. So my earning potential, it's going to impact my career growth or my career trajectory. It's going to influence my promotability because the answer is always going to be no if I never ask the question. I'm never going to achieve anything if I don't try. But if I ask the questions, who knows? Maybe it's going to be yes, maybe it's going to be no. I have a chance. If I try, who knows? Maybe I'll succeed. maybe I'll fail, but by the way, I don't believe in failure. I believe you learn. You don't just fail.
That's I just want to summarize some of the things that I was taking notes on
Sorry,
as
I'm
we
a
were
chatter
talking for our. No,
box.
this is so wonderful. I just want to summarize for our audience. So, if you find yourself struggling with imposter syndrome or negative self-talk, some of the things that I've heard is leverage what that you can do and keep showing up, because that experience builds a foundation that we can use to kind of be more accurate in our self-assessment. I heard lots of discussions around building community and giving back and volunteering and putting yourself in areas where you can really share instead of focusing on our own self-talk. And then the last thing I heard is really knowing the concrete impacts of how we talk to ourselves. Something that I never thought before is how it impacts our
Oh,
promotability and our career.
it
It's
does
really
because
easy to think that it's just in your own head, but it's really not.
yeah, exactly. I've got this little checklist that I got from Donna. I kind of innovated around it and kind of put it into my own words and also looked at some other materials that I think are interesting on the topic. And I kind of see it as, this step by step thing. So let's just talk about step one. Step one is really what I mentioned, knowing your origin story, right? I mean, origin stories are important for a variety of different reasons, but in this particular case, it's okay, yeah, it sounds cheesy. Go back to childhood, blah. We're gonna get all like psychological here, but know where this stuff comes from. For me, I have these pivotal moments in my life. It wasn't just those three, but those were three pivotal moments that have to do with education. And I've heard a lot of people here, a lot of people have been told those kind of things, and it influences how you see yourself, how you believe what you believe your future prospects are. So know your history, embrace it, forgive others for potentially causing it in you. I'm not angry anymore at Spanish professor, high school counselor, or whatever grade teacher. I know that a lot of it comes from that. I also think it's important to know, second off, this is number two, what triggers you, because certain situations, places, types of people, maybe even emotional states might trigger that feeling inside of you. So recognize when it pops up so that, because if you're going to be in that situation, you could probably expect that maybe I'm going to be feeling a certain way. And what can you tell yourself in those situations? I think it's also important, number three, to embrace change. If X, Y, and Z give you a rise, make you feel a certain way, all right, accept that, but then also understand that it's a false narrative. It's not based on fact, it's based on feeling. It's just like when you said, wow, when I got on, I thought, wow, you're smart, right? Meanwhile, in our heads, the other person may not be thinking, like, oh, I wonder if I'm talking too much, or I wonder if I'm babbling too much, or I wonder if whatever. Number four, and that's truth time. And again, that is really about thinking about, what are your superpowers? What are your strengths? If you don't know, ask somebody. Ask people, hey, what am I good at? I don't really know. What do you think I'm good at? What do you like about me? Ask people who you trust. People I call my Thrive Hive or your Thrive Hive. People around you who are infectiously positive about your growth. There is time for constructive feedback. Don't get me wrong. But in this instance, you're focusing on your superpowers and your strengths. Who cares about what you're not good at? Think about what you're good at. Hone in there. Think about how to combat those bad thoughts with the good thoughts and balance yourself. Step five, embracing your awesomeness. So, again, is it fair for me to compare my chapter 5 to someone else's 25? Countering those negative feelings, make your positive come out really at the forefront, making them more prominent, making sure that the negative is not taking over the positive, which is hard work. Number 6, self care. So practice self care. Be mindful. Don't overwork. I'm terrible at that, by the way. You're not going to be perfect all the time. Accept that sometimes good is good enough. Reward yourself with micro opportunities for emotional, social, and physical care. Write down how you're going to take care of yourself every day. Actually do it. I know people talk about, well, use lipstick on the mirror, put up sticky notes places, whatever works for you, an app, lots of stuff. Experiment. Take yourself out of your comfort zone. Take on stretch assignments that are a stretch for you. Volunteer with a startup or a nonprofit. Ask for help, but you've got to be accountable. Like, for example, there's certain things where I know I'm not good at. I'm not going to volunteer to build a mobile application unless I'm ideating and coming up with ideas around what could be built. I'm going to bring in other people who are good at that. I'm not good at that. I know that. But what? That's okay. But take on little experiments to test yourself. Share your successes loud and proud. Don't be afraid to talk about what good you're doing. It's not arrogant. It's actually showing leadership. Number 8, I think I might have told you I was on number 7, but I think I missed number 7. But number 8, this is what happens when you've got ADHD. Gather your Thrive Hive. So gather the people around you. Let the real and authentic you shine. Don't be afraid to share your vulnerabilities, your flaws, your insecurities, but also be tolerant of others when they make mistakes. Because if you make a mistake, do you want somebody yelling at you or talking about how bad it was or blah, blah, blah? No, be a friend. So think about if you're ever like in the thick of things and you realize like, oh gosh, I'm not good enough. I feel like an imposter. I'm a fraud. What advice would you give a friend? Write that down. That's what you do, not the exact opposite. How many times do we do the exact opposite thing? The last thing is do the thing. I got this from Donna as well. Say, I got this. Say, I believe that I got this. And then actually do it. Even if you fail, you didn't actually fail. You learned something. You stretched yourself. And you're working toward that inner bully that you have in your mind or sitting on your shoulder.
Melissa, that is such incredible things to share. I can't think of a better place for us to stop. Thank you absolutely so much for sharing your expertise with us and your passion. I'd also like to thank all of our listeners for joining us today. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast and visit us both on YouTube and at hkn.org. We'll be linking Dr. Melissa Sasse's Twitter account down below, as well as some information about her nonprofits if you'd love to learn more. So again, Melissa, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I hope for everyone who's listening, you found this insightful. I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope you're not sleeping. If you are, rewind and get back to where you were. It's time to wake up. You've got action items.
I love that. Well, there's our charge for the rest of the week. Thank you all, and we will see you on our next episode of HKN Career Conversations.